Drakengard is a game that I've really been wanting to play for a really long time, but every single time that I brought that up, or when people would see it in my backlogged list, they would just call me crazy. Everyone always says that the game is one of the worst games ever made, that it's literally unplayable and that I should just watch a cutscene compilation instead. But that only made me more intrigued. The reason that I wanted to play it so badly was probably the same as it is with most people nowadays, being that I'm a massive fan of the NieR franchise. Both Replicant and Automata are some of my favorite games ever made, so it's only natural that I was interested in going back to where this franchise started, back to the original Drakengard. And you know what, now that I played it, it's actually not that bad, and I don't even think I would call it unplayable. The game has a lot of flaws, that's for sure. Some of these just come with its age, but others are definitely just genuine flaws. In some ways, it's not even a game that fits the description of a good game. But that doesn't mean it's unplayable. Yeah, the gameplay is pretty bad and extremely repetitive, the OST can be hard to listen to at times, and the story is really strange, confusing, and definitely messed up. But despite all of this, I do genuinely like this game. It's just got something to it. There's a reason why it's still relevant all of these years later, and I think that it's more than just it being a prequel to NieR, because the connections to NieR are actually extremely minimal. I guess it might just be the Yokotaro effect. But now that I played the game for myself, I really wanted to talk about it and talk about my experience with it. And the timing literally couldn't be better. I didn't plan this at all when I started the game, but it's 2023 right now, which means that it's the 20th anniversary of Drakengard this year. So I genuinely don't think that there is a better time to talk about my experience than right now. And I actually look back on playing this game as a positive experience. Like, I'm really glad that I played it myself instead of just watching a playthrough, but at the same time, I can kind of see why it has the reputation that it has. As I already said, the gameplay is pretty bad. I'd even go as far as to say that it's pretty shit. And this is for many reasons, but to be honest, most of these problems only started showing after playing the game for a while. Because at first, I actually didn't mind the gameplay that much. For those who don't know, Drakengard is a linear game and it's divided into chapters. Every chapter consists of a few levels or quests, and these are called verses. Some of these are just story events, either CGI cutscenes or in-game engine cutscenes, but most of them are of course the gameplay missions themselves. And those are once again split up into basically two types of missions. You have the ground missions and the dragon missions, in both of which you control Kaim, the main character, as he fights his way through the enemies. The ground missions are actually very similar to the Warriors games, since besides for combat, there's not much to do in these and you're just going through hordes of enemies, often killing like 100, 200 in each mission. But unlike the Warrior games here, this actually kind of plays into the message or the point of Drakengard, which I'll definitely come back to later when I talk about the story. The controls for both of these mission types are very clunky though. It's an old game, I didn't mind it too much at first. Yeah, they haven't aged the best, the camera probably being the worst offender here. Attacking, magic, dodging, it might have felt awkward, but not to the point of being unplayable, especially in the early quests, since most of these quests take place in open field, so even if the camera or the rest of the controls are annoying for a bit, you can always just take your distance from the enemies before putting yourself in a better position before going back in to fight the rest. The enemies were mostly also standing around in small groups, and they're pretty separated, so you didn't have to worry about triggering too many enemies at once. And in the ground missions, you also unlock your dragon really early on, which introduces a pretty cool mechanic, being that you can call this dragon at basically any time in battle, who will then sweep in from above, allowing you to jump on top of the dragon, and the gameplay seamlessly transitions from ground combat to dragon combat, where you're flying over the battlefield and just raining down fire from above. I actually thought that this was really awesome at first. You're just fighting a horde of enemies as Kaim, using your sword attacks, your magic attacks, and when you get overwhelmed from the amount of enemies or just in general, you press a button get on your dragon, make your brief fire down on them so all of them die, and you fly over to the next group. The dragon is of course completely controllable, so you can take the dragon wherever you want, onto the next group of enemies. Maybe you can thin out their numbers a little bit from the air before jumping off and continuing the fight on foot. And that is, in my opinion, a pretty cool gameplay loop. Even if the mechanics themselves are a bit clunky, it worked and it sold the fantasy, I guess you could say. The balancing here is also done pretty well. Like, yes, the dragon is OP, but Kaim doesn't get XP from dragon kills. So while the dragon is fun and it works in emergencies, you can't just speedrun levels with it if you want to keep up in terms of your level. When using Kaim though, the melee combos are pretty simple, but there is another element that makes up for this, which is the variety in the weapons. Because there are a lot of different weapons, a total number of 65, each of them divided into categories like longswords, hammers, maces, I'm pretty sure, etc. And the fact that there are simply so many weapons is also important for another reason that connects to the story, but I'll touch on that later. Right now, for the gameplay, it's just cool that there are so many of them, since every single weapon, or at least every single weapon type, gives you a completely different moveset. Yeah, the gameplay is still just you spam square for your normal combo, you press triangle for your magic attack, and if you do a well-timed triangle during your square combo, you do some sort of special, but some weapons are faster than others, some will do large sweep attacks, others will do stabs, stuff like that. The special attack is easily the best attack in the game though, since, at least on the two weapons that I mainly used, it was either a pretty decently sized AoE, which would not only do a lot of damage, but it would also stun the enemies around me and push them away, and the other weapon had a ranged attack that shot pretty far forward. There's not really much reason to use anything else besides for this attack though. Every level was basically just me running around with Kaim's sword, pressing square, square, triangle, because that's how you triggered it on that weapon. Which did get very repetitive, but I'm gonna touch on the repetitiveness in a second. First, I quickly want to mention the other mission type, because next to the ground missions, you of course also have the dragon missions. In these, you're not just flying above the battlefield to fight the enemies down below, but you're actually flying pretty high up and engaging in aerial combat. The controls here are actually a lot better than in the ground combat, but they're still not the most precise and pretty awkward at times. But again, it's definitely not unplayable, and it's actually pretty fun at first. You just fly around, you can attack them with square, you have a special attack with triangle, and you can dodge with L1, R1. And I think it's because in the open air that it just feels a lot more fluent. You're not really getting attacked from all sides, you can easily escape a group of enemies by sprinting away, or flying away faster, I guess, by holding X. In the air, the combat just felt a lot better, even if, again, it was still a bit awkward and a bit clunky, especially in boss fights when you had to evade certain attacks, or when you had to aim at a very specific small target. The major problem with these missions though is that they have a lot less variety, since again you only have 2 attacks and you can only do so much while you're in the air. And that then brings me back to what I said just a few moments ago, with the biggest problem of this game being that the game is just extremely repetitive to play. Every single dragon mission basically plays the exact same, and ground missions also don't have that much going for it. The only variety there being either indoor battles or outdoor battles, but there's also not really a big difference between them, besides for just indoors you can't use your dragon, and indoors you're usually in smaller rooms, which is not very good, especially not with this control scheme. And besides that, most of the levels also just look and feel the exact same. So as much as I didn't mind the gameplay at first, it quickly starts dragging as you're just using the same attack on the same looking enemy in the same looking level for 20 plus hours. I'm pretty sure that I can show you gameplay from 2 hours into the game or gameplay from 10 hours into the game, and you probably wouldn't even be able to tell which is which without having to look at my health bar or something. The only real way to switch things up in the gameplay is by changing your weapons, but your weapons level up by use, gaining XP on every kill, making it so your best course of action is actually just to keep using the early game weapons unless you really want to grind it out. Since in late game, Kaim's first weapon at max level actually does more damage than the new weapons that I got. and they take really long to level. Because while most weapons are acquired by doing side objectives and side challenges, you do get a new sword at some point in the story, and I just thought, oh, you get Kaim's sword at the start of the game, now I'm around the halfway point and I get a new sword, maybe this is his next canon weapon, so to say. But after using that new weapon for a few levels, doing no damage at all and it not leveling at all, I was literally just putting myself at a disadvantage, so I switched back to Kaim's sword and continued spamming the same special square square triangle attack. At the very least, it's really easy to swap between weapons, you can equip a lot of them at the same time, but still I never really saw much reason to switch between them, besides for when I needed a bit more of a ranged special attack or when I wanted to go back to my AoE on the Kaim's sword. The quests themselves are also really long, going up to 50 minutes sometimes, and it's important to keep in mind that there are no checkpoints whatsoever. And that brings us to something that might be even worse than the repetitiveness or the length of the quests. The fact that the game has really bad balancing, and some enemies and some versus levels are genuinely just bullshit. You have brutes that can interrupt your combo and throw you on the floor with like one hit, while also blocking most, if not all, of your normal attacks. You have archers who can either one-shot you from off-screen, or they can one-shot your dragon out of the sky. You have mages that reflect magic, so you can't use ranged attacks or your dragon on them, since all your ranged attacks and all your dragon's attacks are magic, so they're just gonna reflect it. And then you also have ranged mages, and my god, the fucking ranged mages. Sometimes they put like 10 of them in a group and you can't do anything against them. You can't get close because the whole group will just shoot at you. They'll stun lock you and kill you before you even get close, because of course there are like 10 of them attacking you at once. You can't even take your distance or use ranged attacks because all ranged attacks are magic and they will reflect them. The only thing that you can really do against them is sprint up to them, because sprinting gives you kind of a shield, and then press attack at the very last moment, which kind of does a small lunge forward AoE attack, but it's pretty hard to hit those. On top of that, the camera is just really bad, so sprinting up to them or evading their ranged attacks is easier said than done. And because the camera is so bad, it also happens really often that you just get hit from off screen, either by a ranged attack or by a random guy that just runs up to you, but it's literally impossible for you to see him. Imagine being 50 minutes into a mission, you're at low health, you get hit from off screen by an enemy you didn't even know was there, you die and your progress is reset. There's not much you can do about that. Oh, and before I forget to mention it, you cannot heal, unless you find a chest, of which there is like one in the entire level, and that's if you're lucky, because many levels just don't have any heals at all. Or you gotta get super lucky and get a health drop from an enemy, which will not heal you for a lot, but it's better than nothing. But then again, those don't happen very often, and I only ran into them in the very last chapters, so I'm not even sure if that was a thing in the early game. And the later you get into the game, they also like putting you in smaller rooms or corridors compared to the open fields of the early game, with maybe a million enemies jammed in one room, and then the jankiness that at first I didn't really mind really becomes a problem, especially when paired with all of the shitty enemy balancing that I just mentioned. So everything that was good about the combat, being the flow of the fight and jumping on the dragon, doesn't really matter in late game, because either everyone is gonna reflect magic, making the dragon useless besides for a quick getaway, but then there's probably gonna be a catapult somewhere that'll shoot you down, or you're indoors somewhere in a small corridor getting attacked from all sides with literally nowhere to run. You'll just get stunned, probably killed within a few seconds, so you can do everything again. Plus, of course, just the fact that the game is really repetitive and kind of mind-numbing after 20 hours of literally just pressing square, square, triangle, square, square, triangle, square, square, triangle, square, triangle. So even if the gameplay starts off decent, it gets very boring and kind of mind-numbing after a few hours already. And beyond that, it just gets really annoying and tedious as the game tries to bump up the difficulty by either just having impossible enemies there, or by just putting a million of them in one room. I was really glad that I was emulating this game so I could use save states, because otherwise I do not think I would have been able to finish this game, I'm gonna be completely honest here. So, maybe the game is unplayable if you're just playing it on your PS2, but emulating it does make it at least playable in my opinion. Like, I might have sounded very annoyed in that last part, but it wasn't that bad? I don't know. Looking back on playing the game right now, I'm like, it wasn't that bad, was it? But now that I have my script written out and I'm reading it, I'm not gonna lie, there were some very annoying moments that I wasn't having the best time playing it, I'll say it like that. But that's the gameplay side of things. And luckily, I don't think there's anyone that mainly plays Drakengard 1 for the gameplay. Everyone is drawn to Drakengard for its story, of course. And the story is actually really cool, even if it takes a while to kick up speed. Don't get me wrong, it has some interesting things happening throughout, but the best stuff only starts happening when we're building up to the ending of the first route. Before that, it's mostly just a slow build-up to all of the insanity that will kick off later. We start the game off with our main trio of Kaim, Furrier, and Inuart. Kaim being the main character, Inuart being his best friend who really likes singing, and Furrier being Kaim's sister, but she's also the fiancée of Inuart, she's the princess, and she's also one of the seals for the gods, which kind of makes her a god herself, or at least that's how a lot of people in the game see her. I'm not gonna go into all the lore details here about the gods and the seals or whatever. Drakengard lore is pretty fucking insane and extremely in-depth, but it's also really interesting. I'm only gonna give my thoughts on the general story stuff here, while also giving enough context to everything that I talk about, so you won't be lost, I hope. But if you're interested in more pure Drakengard lore, there are a lot of videos out there and I highly recommend them, as this world is honestly fascinating, and those videos are a lot better at explaining it than I will probably ever be. Before talking about the story itself though, there is something that Yoko said in an interview which I read after playing the game, and I think that it's really interesting, and because of that I really want to mention it before talking about the story, which is about how he came up with the idea of Drakengard and the story that he wants to tell with it. Being that he used to look at games at the time in which you would kill hundreds of enemies in every mission, and it would always be shown as an achievement, something to be celebrated, something to enjoy. And he just randomly kinda just thought about that, and thought about it in a more realistic light. Because if someone would kill hundreds of people and get enjoyment out of it, you'd have to be an insane person. So he kinda just took that idea and ran with it. He made a game in which you kill this many people, but almost all the characters are insane basically. Even if they might not look like it from the beginning, during the game it'll become clear that all of them have some serious issues and some irredeemable qualities. That idea then came together with him trying to put a unique spin on the classic JRPG or classic hero story, in which there's usually a group of heroes that comes together to defeat evil or to save the world, and he kinda just thought, what if we take that idea that I have, what if we do this but with bad people, not anti-heroes, just genuinely bad people, and let's try to see how far we can push this concept, and whether or not people could even be engaged with a story like that. And that idea definitely comes across while playing the game, and I'm not surprised that that was the mindset that he had while creating this game. But if we now get back on track and talk about the story itself, even outside of this, it makes some very interesting decisions, like with our main character Kaim for example. In the first mission, he's just a normal protagonist, but then he gets defeated in battle, or at least he almost gets defeated. He is brought to the verge of death, but then he finds a dragon who is in a very similar position. So to save both of their lives, they decide to create a pact together, which would save the lives of both of them, but in return, Kaim loses the ability to speak, since you always have to pay a price for making a pact, basically turning him into a silent protagonist. I know that silent protagonists aren't exactly new or unique, but I wouldn't classify him as a normal silent protagonist, since the game isn't built for a silent protagonist. He is not just supposed to be a self-insert, he is his own character, and there are a lot of emotional scenes in the game where he looks like he wants to speak his mind, but he just can't. At times it does look kinda silly though, since in the dialogue scenes at the bottom, you always have a close-up of the character that's talking, kind of like in a visual novel I guess. But since Kaim can't talk, he's just kinda there, staring off into the distance, and I don't know, it just looked a bit silly sometimes. But it does make for some pretty interesting moments, just the fact that he can't speak, but he definitely wants to. And that's also just really interesting from the point of all of his relationships with the other characters, specifically with the dragon, since the dragon is actually the only character that he can communicate with. They have a pact so they can read each other's minds. And the dragon starts off just hating humanity. She hates Kaim, but in some endings she actually talks about growing to like him and humanity in general, trusting him enough to tell Kaim her name in one of the endings, which she's never done before. No human has ever known her name, but Kaim does in one of the endings. But I will get to that when I talk about the endings. There are of course also a lot of other characters like I talked about with NieR and Fergie, but their story ties in very closely with the main plot, so I'm just gonna talk about their character as I talk about the plot itself. And during the main story of Drakengard, there is a war going on between the Empire and the Union. The Union being the side that our characters are on. But the Empire also just isn't a normal empire. It's basically a cult that wants to summon their god called the Watchers. But to do that, they need to break all of the seals of the gods. These are spread out throughout the land, but of course one of them is Fergie, causing the Empire to track her down in order to sacrifice her. NieR and Kaim of course don't just let this happen and they want to protect her, so they set out to find a hiding place for her. But in this process, NieR gets captured and brainwashed, turning him into one of the main antagonists. He also makes a pact with the dragon because otherwise he wouldn't really be able to fight Kaim, and his payment for that is pretty interesting. He just loses his ability to sing. Practically, it's kind of a small payoff compared to Kaim, who literally can't speak at all, can't sing, can't talk. NieR, he can talk just fine, he just can't sing. But the cult basically told NieR that Kaim wants to take Fergie away from him, causing him to fight Kaim and kidnap Fergie. And now that she's been taken away and NieR is evil, the main portion of the game starts. In this, you join up with Verdele, who's a priest from the Union, and together you set out to protect all of the seals to prevent the Empire from destroying them. On your quest, you can also run into some optional and missable side characters, like this guy, but I'll talk about them later, since while they can join you in this route, they're not really relevant until Route D, so yeah. But during this large portion of the game, there's honestly not that much that's happening. You're just visiting the seals and failing every single time, making it feel like the fight is ultimately for nothing. But that's also not a bad thing, because that's what the game is trying to tell you. That's also what the endings are reflecting, and that's just the message of the game, that this violence is ultimately all for nothing. But it is still a game, and playing through it and looking at the story events that happen here, it's just not that great. There's not that much going on here, there's not many interesting things happening. It's all just building towards the ending, until you join up with Fergie and the cult leader Mana, who is a small girl that's been possessed by the gods or the Watchers, sometimes even letting them speak through her. It does sound kinda ridiculous and silly, to be perfectly honest, but in general, she's a creepy kid, which is the vibe that they were going for.
La 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 la. Don't miss the Watchers. La 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 la.
I don't know what Yoko Taro has with small girls. They show up in a lot of his games and they're usually creepy and the villain. I don't know which small girl he met in real life that scared him so much, but yeah. But that is then also where the ending takes place, or at least ending A. In ending A, you're too late to save Fergie, breaking the seal, but you do manage to defeat the cult leader Mana. But since the seals are broken, you need a new seal. And that's then when your dragon decides to give her life to become the new seal and to stop the gods from coming through to this world. This ending is where things definitely kicked off for me, especially since the routes after this are where the game is starting to show its strength in the storytelling. This ending specifically though I liked because it really shows the development of Kaim and the dragon. Before passing, as I talked about earlier, she tells Kaim her name, it's Angelus, but shortly after she gives her life to become the new seal, and Kaim is crying as she turns into the seal. It's actually a really good scene for all of the characters present. It's probably one of my favorite endings, together with ending D and of course ending E. It feels a bit incomplete though, since NieR kinda just leaves with Fergie's body. You do chase him a bit, but then you turn back to fight Mana. It's a bit weird that it's left open, but at the same time the other endings do fill in the gaps. Even though the other endings take place in another route, it's kind of a branch, which I don't know, it would have been nice to maybe have a small scene with Inuit and Fourier after ending A, but at the same time, I like that it's being left open. I don't think we always have to know all the details of what happens to everyone, especially not because it's a NieR game, and I feel like that's kind of the strength of the NieR and the Drakengard games now as well. But of course, not everything is left open for interpretation, and the other routes do explain some stuff, as I said, and the way that you unlock these other routes is actually very different compared to NieR. In NieR, you have to replay the game to access the different routes, every replay being different, but here you have to complete certain challenges. For ending B and for ending C, for example, you have to replay the boss fight against Inuit right before you fight Mana. This is the point that I mentioned where he's fleeing with Fourier's body. In Route A, you just fight him here, but then Verdelay decides that we're kind of wasting time on this, and he tells us to go back to Mana instead. But here, if you can defeat him within a certain amount of time, the events of the story actually change, since you defeat him pretty quickly, so you decide to just follow him and see what his plan is. And in ending B, you can see that Inuit is trying to resurrect Fourier, but this doesn't turn out very well, as she turns into a monster, killing Inuit and then also becoming the final boss. Her boss is an aerial boss, which isn't too bad, but she does have a few attacks that are really annoying to dodge because they require some precision dodging in the air, and precision is not this gameplay's strongest point. But you defeat her, and because of the resurrection process, and maybe the fact that Mana is still around, I'm not sure, you see that a lot of copies of the monster Fourier were spawned. And the game kinda just ends with Kaim looking at these monsters filling the horizon while holding his sister's body. Again, a really open-ended ending, but I'll talk about this ending in specific a little bit more after talking about ending C, since it branches out from this right before the resurrection, as you need to fight Inuit a second time in this route, and again, depending on how fast you defeat him, the ending changes. Do it within 3 minutes and you get ending C, any longer than that and you get ending B. Because of that, ending B and C are pretty similar for the majority of the route, but the ending is different. You can also get these endings in any order, which is strange because usually you would have to get them in order. Like, you have to get ending A before being able to get B or C, and you have to get D before E. And here, I got ending C before B. But that aside, in ending C, Inuit fails to resurrect Fourier since you defeated Inuit so quickly, both of them die, and Kaim just goes back to fight the cult leader Mana, who summoned the dragon to protect her as she is just still a child. But that doesn't go very well as the dragon turns on her and eats her, and Angelus then has to kill that dragon, causing her to go into chaos form. And then she challenges Kaim to a fight in probably one of the worst boss fights that I've perhaps ever played through. Seriously, this room is super small, her hitboxes just don't work, and some of her attacks are painful to dodge with these controls. Often I didn't even know what I had to do against some attacks. Did I have to dodge them? Do they want me to block them? Do they want me to attack the attack with magic? It was really confusing, and I feel that I was really lucky that it only took me an hour, maybe 2. That aside though, you defeat Angelus and she tells Kaim that Mana didn't just summon one dragon, but that thousands of them are on their way and that they all want to wipe out humanity. And then the game basically just ends with Kaim running outside to fight them off. And these endings, ending B and ending C, I think are just alright. They have some cool moments, but not as good as the other ones. I don't know, I feel like they don't really provide any, I would say closure, but none of the endings really provide closure. But when I rolled credits on any of the other endings, I felt satisfied. Well, ending B and C were kinda just like, that was interesting. Maybe it's because they're not as fleshed out, or maybe it's because they're more just what-if situations, especially compared to ending A and D. I don't know, I like them because they do fill in some gaps of ending A, they fill in some gaps for ending D, but in general, I feel like they're more just stepping stones to get to the next ending, which is then of course ending D. And ending D is something else entirely, since you also can't unlock this one by doing some challenges. For this ending you need to meet all of the side characters and you have to do their stories. which is actually pretty cool, but it's not an easy process, since you have to go back and replay certain verses from certain chapters to then unlock entirely new chapters that tell the story of set side characters. But I do like how it's implemented at the same time. The fact that you can go back, complete a certain action, which will then lead to you meeting a character, you see their story, they join your party, and them being there, their actions lead you to meeting more side characters, and ultimately the actions of all of these side characters together completely change the course of the story. And as I talked about before, the Drakengard party is definitely not your classic JRPG cast of characters. The first character that you meet here is Leonard, who is certainly a character. He's very controversial, but I'll talk about that in a second. Leonard joins you very early on. He also has a pact with a fairy, and the price that he had to pay for his pact was losing his vision. Before the events of the game, he was raising 3 younger brothers in a house in the woods, but at the time that he wasn't home, the Empire's forces attacked and killed his brother. Since he was absent during this though, he blames himself for it, but he also can't get himself to take his own life, which is why he decides to join Kaim in the hopes of just dying along the journey. Throughout the game, we do get to know more about him. He seems to be a very kind person, and during quests he often talks about not wanting children or innocent people to get hurt, which is also highlighted in his personal side quest. And besides that, he's also shown to really care about the rest of the party members, especially Seer, and at the end of the story he even finds a purpose again, even if he still can't forgive himself for what happened that day. So, sounds like a nice guy, doesn't he? But here's where we get into the controversy, and I'm not gonna get too deep into this, but Leonard has another struggle, a more personal dilemma, so to say, with his sexuality, and he has certain urges that he's trying to suppress. I'm just gonna quote his wiki page here, because I have no idea how else to word this. He displays overt fondness for children, which is another reason for which he hates himself, and it certainly reframes his entire character. Now, I don't want to get into that at all. You can find more about him on the wiki if you're interested. You can think of him what you want, but I think that it's really interesting that the game which I played did not show any of this. Because apparently in the Western release of Drakengard, all of this is cut, because that version of the game is heavily censored. On one hand, I think that this is a bit of a shame. It literally changes his entire character and how you look at him. It changes the character that the writers and Yoko Taro created for this game, because while it is only one aspect of him, it reframes a lot of his dialogue and actions, but at the same time, it's completely understandable that the localization team did not want to have to deal with it. So I can't blame them for cutting it either. I don't want to talk about this aspect of the game myself either. I just thought it was interesting that they censored it and that they cut it out, which is why I'm talking about it. Because while playing the game, I had no idea about any of this. It was only until my friend and fellow content creator Junospite, that I also do a podcast with, by the way, check it out in the description, check him out in the description. But while I was playing the game, I was streaming it in a Discord voice call, and he came in while I was playing through the final chapter of the game maybe, and he told me about that aspect of his character, which completely changed my view on him. And while looking up stuff for this video, this wasn't the only thing that was censored for this release. Like for example, the other layers to the relationship between Furrier and Kaim, and some other stuff that I'll have on screen right now, which explains a lot now that I think about it, because I always heard stuff about Drakengard being impossible to remake thanks to the subjects that it deals with, but in the version that I played, most of these subjects were either toned down to an extreme, or they were completely cut out. So I was always a bit confused while playing it, like why exactly can this game not be remade? But now looking deeper into it, yeah, I understand. It is a bit of a shame, since I always just prefer it when the original vision of the creator is preserved, especially when it plays that deep into the whole point of the game. Like, the point of this game is that it's centered around different people with different irredeemable qualities. And because of these censors, a lot of those irredeemable qualities are just kinda lost. But at the same time, fair enough, honestly, Yoko Taro put some weird stuff in here. I get that they didn't want to bring it over when translating the game, I would even get, if they don't want to remake the game for that reason, to not have to get into the controversy. And with that, I'm also going to be moving on from the controversy myself, and I'm going to be moving on from Leonard to the next side character, who is Arioch, and she is a very strange character. She's basically just an insane person. She also has a pact partner again, and her prize was losing her womb, and before the events of the game she saw her husband and her child get killed, which basically just mentally completely broke her, causing her to go insane, even turning to eating people. Specifically children, because she wants to become one with them. Yeah, I guess that's her character, and I guess that she's just with us now because she wants to kill people, which is what she does. She doesn't do much else, she doesn't talk a lot, even within her side quest. She's just here to go on a murder spree, and I guess that's Arioch. But then there's also Seer, the final party member, and he's actually a normal person, I think. And honestly, I think he's pretty cool. He's also really interesting because he is a pretty important character, even connected to the main story, where Leonard and Arioch aren't really important from a character standpoint, it's more their influence that makes them important to the story. Seer was already important to the main story from the beginning, because he is the twin brother of Mana, you know, the possessed cult leader. So his reason for joining Kaim isn't just because he wants to kill people or because he wants to die somewhere. His reason is to find his sister and to bring her back home. Just like all the other party members, he also has a pact but with a golem, and because of this he's really strong in battle. I forgot to mention this earlier, but you can also switch to your party members in battle for a short amount of time, and Seer's magic attack literally one-shots everything in the final quest of ending D, which is incredible. I spent hours and hours on that level struggling with Kaim, barely doing damage to this one specific enemy type. I would just get thrown around and killed, game over all the time. It was really hard. I was so done with this game. But then, I don't know why exactly, but I swapped to him and I used his magic attack, and I shit you not, he one-shots everything. Everything just died, and I was breezing through the level, so I'm definitely not biased towards him for that. But getting back on track, the price for his pact is actually very important as well. His price that he has to pay was he had to give away his time, so he literally can't age anymore, causing him to believe that he is the little hero from a fairy tale that his mother used to tell him. And that fairy tale is about the story of a younger warrior who also stole time and he ended up saving the world. And the fact that he thinks this causes him to make some very important decisions later in the game. Which then brings us back to the endings with ending D, because now that the party is complete, everything goes quite differently, especially since you're also meeting them throughout the story. You're still visiting the seals, trying to prevent their destruction, but this time we also visit different seals and you do it in a different order to go to different locations. One of which being the Ocean Fortress, where we actually run into Mana. And here, things start to derail. Seer, finally being reunited with her, tries to talk her out of the cult, but he of course fails, which then leads to his golem killing her, which also brings down the fortress that was keeping Inuit and Furier, killing both. And now that all the seals are destroyed and Mana is dead, an absolute insane chain of events starts as the Watchers descend onto Earth. And they're shaped like giant babies. It's quite strange, but you fight them, or in my case I let Seer fight them, since these are the enemies that Kaim did no fucking damage to, and Seer for some reason just one-shots them. During this chain of events, Arioch also dies as she runs towards a group of Watchers, as the idea of getting eaten by them excites her, if I understood correctly. Yeah, again, it's Arioch, don't worry about it, because then after her sacrifice, I guess, the Queen Beast appears, who is like a leader or a mother of the Watchers, if again I understand correctly. And she starts affecting time and space, because of course she does, and she looks pregnant while doing so. Maybe that's not worth mentioning, but I feel like if I just put this in the background, people would have been confused, so I'm gonna mention it. But this is then basically the end of the world. The seals are destroyed, Inuit, Furrier, Ariosh and Mana are all dead, and the Watchers are here. They're super hard to fight, besides for if you're Seer, and they're affecting time and space. But right when all hope seems lost, Seer, as the little hero, has a plan to save the world. And seeing as there's no other option here, we follow his plan, which is basically just to go up to the Queen Beast and freeze it in time. This also leads to Leonard's sacrifice. Throughout the game, ever since meeting Seer, he has been a bit more active in the story, trying to protect Seer as he reminds him of his little brothers. Maybe there are other reasons for him being nice to Seer, but that's up for interpretation. I'm just gonna see it as him being nice to him, because he's a little kid, and just like his brothers were. But he does get a really nice scene here with his sacrifice, as he says goodbye to the group. As I already said before, over the course of the story, he did seem to grow to like Kame the dragon, and especially Seer. And before this, when joining the group, Leonard didn't care when, where, or why he would die. But now, even if he still can't forgive himself, his death can mean something. He can buy some time for Seer and Kame to give them the opening that they need. And so he completely ignores the complaints of his pact partner, who's basically been complaining for the whole game, and he uses a massive self-destruction spell, taking out a large group of Watchers and also making way for Seer and Kime. They then fly up to the Queen Beast. Kime and Angelus die on the way there, but at least they manage to bring Seer to where he has to be, so he can freeze the Queen Beast in time. We see that the Watchers' invasion ends, and that's also how the game ends. It's a very mysterious ending. It's also a really sad ending, since basically everyone dies, but it's definitely an ending, and I think that it's also the main ending. We don't know exactly what happens after this and what the consequences are for this world, but it's the most complete ending out of all of them. Especially since you have to meet all the side characters, you have your full party, and every single one of them serves a purpose in this route. If we're going purely by canon though, there is nothing following this ending, seeing as Drakengard 3 is a prequel and Drakengard 2 follows from ending A. Sort of. It actually follows an alternate timeline that's basically step for step the exact same as ending A, but Yoko Taro banished Drakengard 2 to another timeline, another universe, just to make sure that it's not canon, but we're not here to talk about Drakengard 2. The only thing that canonically and chronologically comes after Drakengard 1 then is the NieR franchise, and this one follows the final ending, ending E. Because of this, I guess ending E would be considered the main ending of Drakengard, but I think that that's only in retrospect. When back in 2003, all we had was Drakengard 1 for the PS2, I'm pretty sure ending D was looked at to be the main ending or the true ending or whatever. And I'm saying this because ending E is basically just a shitpost. It's a joke ending. It's about a minute or two, if even that, of story content, and someone also told me that Yoko Taro secretly put it in the game, with only a few devs knowing about it. I don't know how accurate that is, but it sounds like something Yoko Taro would do. But before I talk about that ending itself, I quickly want to mention how to unlock that ending, because that only makes the joke better. You need to collect every single weapon in the game, and as I mentioned in the beginning, there are 65 of them, of which you unlock 2, if I remember correctly, during the main story. Now, you might be wondering, how do I unlock the other 63 ones? Well, you do that by completing challenges within previous levels. So you gotta go back and replay a large amount of missions, completing some tedious tasks. Some of them are pretty simple, like finding a chest, but others are pretty tedious, like make your way over to this room and walk up to these paintings in this specific order, or literally wait for 30 minutes within the level and the chest will appear. That, or they're actually really hard challenges, like beat this mission on hard mode within X amount of minutes and have 50% of your health left without using magic or without healing, and then you have the ones that people literally haven't figured out yet, or at least not on the wiki, because some of the weapons just had descriptions like, just kill enemies around here and pray to God that it works. And then, only then, once you have all 65 weapons, the final ending will unlock. I do want to mention that I did not do this myself. I looked up the ending on YouTube, call me a fake gamer, a fake Drakengard fan, say that I didn't actually beat the game, say whatever you want, but at least I still have my sanity. I actually wanted to do this at first though. I started my playthrough with the intent of doing it, but after playing the game for 20 to 30 hours to get to ending D, I wasn't really feeling it, but I still wanted to do it until I saw the requirements, which was just like, nah, I'm good. And I'm glad that I gave up, honestly, because now I'm actually relatively positive about the game. I can look back at my experience with Drakengard and say that I had... I feel like I had a decent time with it. It's a positive experience looking back at it. But I can assure you that if I had to do all of that, put all of those hours into it, and then get greeted with a 1-minute cutscene, I would probably fucking hate this game. I do genuinely respect everyone that actually went through this though. You'd have to be insane, but I respect it. But now to talk about the ending itself, it starts right after Leonard sacrifices himself. Kaim is flying on Angelus closer and closer to the Queen Beast, but instead of using Seer's time power, they decide to fight it directly, which causes time and space to collapse as a rift opens up to another dimension, bringing Kaim and Angelus, and of course the Queen Beast, to our dimension, specifically Tokyo in 2003. And this is where the final boss starts with the Queen Beast. After collecting every single weapon in the game, you face this boss in a rhythm game. You don't use any of the weapons, your level also doesn't matter because you die in one hit. So the grind of doing all of those tedious and annoying challenges was literally for nothing. But after defeating the boss, comes the best part. The Queen Beast crumbles. The ashes fall down on the city. Angelus announces their victory, but not even a second later they get shot down by a Japanese fighter jet. Cue credits. And I think that that's incredible, because as a joke ending, it works, it's great. The what the fuck moment when you realize where you are, the strange rhythm boss, and then just a fighter jet out of nowhere, the comedic timing of it was all perfect. But it also has this really strange aura to it, especially since the credits don't play any music at all. It's just soft static noises, which make it kinda eerie. I loved watching this ending. It was definitely a joke ending, you can see that it was meant to be a joke ending. But looking at it now, knowing what's next, it's honestly fascinating how a joke can go on to create this incredible franchise. And it also strangely makes sense. I'm not gonna go into the details of how it connects to NieR exactly, but if I understood correctly, the TLDR should be something like: the ashes of the Queen Beasts fell down on the earth, they then infected humanity with a special disease that is incurable, and that then of course led to the creation of the Gestalt project, which we see in the original NieR Gestalt or in NieR Replicant. And yeah, I do think this makes sense. If a godly being from another dimension would descend on Earth only to dissolve into ashes with humanity breathing in those ashes, there would probably be some kind of fucked up disease spawning from it. So I do actually love this ending, it was so much fun to watch it. And again, I was really happy that I didn't go on the grind, because then I don't think I would have liked the ending as much. But yeah, that's Drakengard. Would I recommend it to anyone? Probably not, but personally I am genuinely happy that I experienced this game myself, even if I'm not gonna directly recommend it to someone. But if someone would come up to me and be like, I wanna play Drakengard, I'm not gonna stop them. The gameplay might have not aged the best, it might be super repetitive, it might kind of be bullshit at points. But at the same time, I don't think this game is as bad as people make it out to be. I wouldn't call it unplayable. I expected to go into this hating the game from the beginning, torturing myself through it, and looking back on it as why did I play that? But I actually started it pleasantly surprised, only for then the game to become very repetitive, really monotonous, which then did kind of turn into torture. But in the end, I do look back on it as a positive experience, somehow. Especially after making this video, it made me appreciate the game more. I don't know, I guess some people might be bothered more by the gameplay than others, which is why it got the unplayable reputation that it has today, but I'm glad that the game has some diehard fans out there that are defending it, because all in all, it's not that bad. And while I myself might not be one of these diehard Drakengard fans now, I do kinda love the game, and I am 100% playing Drakengard 3 sometime next year. Hell, maybe I'll even check out Drakengard 2, but I don't know about that one. And when I do eventually check them out, I'll definitely be tweeting about it on my Twitter, and I'll probably make a video on them as well. But with that, I think I said everything that I have to say about Drakengard 1. Thank you so much for watching. This video became a lot longer than I had originally planned. At first, this was just gonna become a 10-minute video or something, maybe 15, in which I talked about my thoughts. But as I was writing the script, it became a lot more, and it's actually really fun to make. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. It genuinely means a lot to me. And if you liked it, why not leave a like and leave a comment? I always read the comments. I try to reply to as many of them as possible. And while you're at it, why not check out my channel and subscribe? I really appreciate all of the support. But with that, I'm gonna end the video here. I hope you enjoyed, and hopefully I'll see you guys again soon.